Chapter 1. The Flight. I woke up to the sound of waves crashing along a warm, sandy shore. Unfortunately, I wasn't at the beach. That was the sound of my alarm welcoming me to my next day of work, and I had a flight to catch. My destination, Tokyo, Japan. A client was waiting for me in an entirely different continent, and I couldn't disappoint. As a salesman, I understand the need for face-to-face contact when negotiating a deal. That being said, 7,000 miles is a tad excessive. My employer disagreed, so away I went. Traveling had become second nature to me at that point. Since my first week on the job, I've been given the daunting task of flying across America on a weekly basis. Deadlines, jet lag, doses of neurosis, and all those wonderful experiences had all taught me a crucial fact. Your Ambien is just as important as your plane ticket. Without them, you're screwed. At least I am. I checked my bag for the third time to make sure that both were present, took my medication, and went out the door. JFK Airport awaited me. If you are a person who doesn't use planes or airlines, congratulations. You have won the grand prize of not having to deal with the post-9/11 blasphemy that is airport security. Over the duration of my trips, half-hour waits being pulled offline and the inevitable chore being felt up became an unfortunate part of my routine. Before you delve too deep down the rabbit hole of my last point, allow me to educate you. The second those automatic doors whoosh open and welcoming me inside its stress-riddled labyrinth, perils await for me around the corners of every turn. Nowhere is safe. Nowhere is quiet. Just people blitzed on anxiety and sprinters sapped of time management skills gushing through the hallways. When I'm not evading the anarchic army of plane dwellers, I'm busy avoiding the gaze of two hapless cretins. They slither the halls of JFK like a pair of supersized slugs, darting from person to person, praying the face they find is mine. Regarding the tale of two touchy ticklers, we'd have to turn to TSA, a ghastly group led by Tweedledee and Tweedledum. A daft duo, wasting their time testing an ordinary 29-year-old kid who had gone through the same song and dance with them over a dozen times. They probably wanted to avert the verbal vomit and jarring often slung by my fellow passengers and knew I wouldn't cause a quarrel. And guess what? They're right. I did my absolute best to avoid as much human interaction as possible when on my weekly flights. This included not extending my time with two vexing simpletons. Nevertheless, I was their favorite customer. Can you imagine if your entire life's potential, all that capacity built up over decades of development, resulted in working in a clogged airport oozing with sweat and sadness? Heart-wrenching if you ask me. Then again, this is the same person whose glorious growth has produced a man who spends his waking hours making rich men richer, selling cat medication, and being easily satisfied. So, what the hell do I know? The people playing another meaningless role in the wonderful play we call life, and parading around in their costumes and barking orders. Alas, two men who've eaten everything their eyes have seen had turned their attention towards power. A feast that never ends. Their role just happened to be security guards. Agents who, like I've said ad nauseum, had an affinity for giving me a pat-down every time they saw me. And this time wasn't any different. While waiting on the albatross that is the line for customs, I spotted the two bumbling idiots waddling over. Both were overweight, mustached, and assholes. Truly a perfect pair. I felt sympathy for the ground in which they walked, as every step they took seemed to shake the earth. The mere vibrations they caused conditioned me to feel dread, while the sight of them coiled my stomach, a feeling anyone with a pair of working eyeballs must have suffered. "How you doing, Walter? Going somewhere nice this week?" one inquired. I glared up at the security guard who was sporting a ketchup-stained necktie. "I'm doing just swell. Do you mind if we can keep it that way?" The other pseudo-cop snickered. "What's the issue, buddy? Aren't you happy to see us?" he asked in a deep southern drawl. It was a sound I initially found amusing, as it stuck out in the sea of nasally New York accents in which I dwelled. After a while, the noise lost its flavor and seemed to sting my eardrums. While standing before the two gargoyles, I decided to play along with their trite, silly game, in part due to the fact that I was bored, but primarily due to my hopes of eluding their grotesque sausages for fingers. A delusional thought, but I hate myself if I didn't at least give it the old college try. "Of course I'm happy," I apologized for my tone, Believe it or not, I can be a tad groggy in the morning. For some reason, a lack of sleep takes a toll on me, I exclaimed. Simply standing there made the two butterballs sweat through their tight white t-shirts. Heavy drops plummeted from their foreheads until they were vacuumed up by one of their many neck rolls. I did my best to maintain eye contact, but I'd be lying if I said if it was easy. They say coffee can fix that problem of yours, and if you put enough milk in the creamer and it doesn't taste half bad, said the condiment-stained blob, offering guidance that was likely scratching at his cognitive capacity. Wow, I never knew caffeine could give you energy. That's some novel advice. I'll be sure to try it. As a matter of fact, that espresso shop over there doesn't seem to have a line. I'm going to head over before it gets busy, I commented, while preserving a bright simper, one that was making the muscles of my cheeks writhe in pain. Just as I was leaving, I felt a big, meaty hand stop me in my tracks. One of the security guards put his claws on my shoulder and smiled. I'm going to ask you to step off the line, mister. I took a deep exhale of disappointment as this familiar process was once again unfolding. How about I skip all the bullshit this week? I'm really not in the mood and I don't want to miss my Tokyo flight, I quipped. The tension was rising as people around me gawked and stared. Unmoved by my request, one officer seemingly took delight in my dismay. Ah, so it's Tokyo this week, huh? I always want to go to China. The food is probably great there, especially the egg rolls. An added layer of rolls was the last thing this man's body needed. Japan, and like I said, can I stroll on by this week? I anxiously asked. I'd been down this road with them before, an impossible level in a game they never allowed me to beat, constructed by two halfwits with a combined IQ of 80. Frustration is far too light a word to describe the feelings this pair of gawns spawned out of me, feelings they surprisingly picked up on and reveled in. They even had the gall to consider my inquiry, cartoonishly grasping at their many chins as they pondered the thought, as if I couldn't see the transparency in a joker's mask. Allowing myself to boil and cook in a broth of dreadful waiting. Following several lengthy seconds of half-hearted consideration, both of the guards glanced at each other, smiled, and unsurprisingly said, no. I'll spare the details of an unnecessary background check and skip to the flight. In truth, it seemed as if my plane was barren, which isn't complaint by any means. If I had the choice, every craft would come equipped with a single seat and a heaping pile of legroom. As I glanced over the sea of weathered gray chairs, my eyes basked in a wonderment at the eccentric cast of characters that appeared to be strapped to the seats. A grizzled amputee, a troop of Boy Scouts led by a pale scoutmaster, a beanpole of a mother holding a nuclear bomb that was a baby on a plane, a mountain of a man skipping down the aisle for a seat, and a pruned clod of dusk, checkered in an ivory lab coat. The rest, well, they all seemed to blend in a dull fixture of faces and eyes. Solemn empty glares that did their best to fuse into the cliched, welcoming smiles expected of them when placed in a room full of strangers. Little did they know the man staring back at their fickle simpers was immune to their charms. Luckily, because I knew it wasn't needed. Look, it can be exhausting trying to please every walking sack of sin that passes you by. Why fall victim to the plague of social fatigue when the person you're trying to coddle will likely forget your face within the passing hours? It's complete and utter waste of time in a sport everyone ceases to stop playing. Now I could inform these players of the tragic mistake they've made. The game they've entered is one that will cease to end and one they'll never win. It's not a game they signed up for, and gosh darn it, they should know that. But informing the masses would just take too much damn time and effort, and between you and I couldn't care less about them. In fact, while gazing at the myriad of inauthentic cloaks before me, I couldn't help but stew in disgust. An overabundance of immutable sheep dressed to the nines with vexing micro-expressions and idiosyncratic behaviors that grated against my matter, shredding it like fresh mozzarella into a dulled state of stupefaction. Before you get upset, allow me to clarify the debauchery of sentences I just heaved onto you. I understand that human behavior might fascinate people, but with a different lens, the right lens, it becomes about as enchanting as watching a worm shrivel away in the sun. Lying there, slowly dying, a dunderhead who strayed onto ash pavement amidst the summer's fury. Sure, I can kneel down and help the countless cretins who venture into death pick them up and lead them to shade, but by doing so, I'd be teaching them nothing, simply reinforcing their ineptitude, and so I balk, ceasing to course-correct the bounty of blind drivers that take the wheel and overflow the roads. Instead, I walk a different path. That path continued down a tiresome hunt through the claustrophobia-inducing aisle, until I spotted my throne. See, D5 would be my bed for the next 13 hours, and had all the amenities I wanted. A plush gap of legroom, a cushion oozing with a soft, feathery pillow, and most importantly, an empty row. No one there to agitate me, a fact that felt a tad too convenient. As I plopped into my bed, I sunk into the fabric which gingerly hugged against my skin, relieving the stress tethered to an hour of hapless meandering and standing inside an airport. A simple task, but if I'm being honest, I'd rather swim within the barrels of a volcano than spend another 15 minutes inside that hellhole. Luckily, that endeavor was no longer a problem, as I seeped deeper into my chair and started the first cycle in my tried and true airplane sleeping process. Part 1. Stick a pair of headphones into your ears and crank the white noise. Both create a lethal relaxation combination. Then plop the two pink goddesses known as Ambien into your mouth and wash it down with some ice-cold water. Eventually, put your jacket or any of your other belongings in the open seats next to you. And on a flight, the last thing you need is some aggravating half-wit disrupting your delve into the unconscious. Finally, close your eyes and put yourself in the most comfortable position available. Mine being a stance in which my arms and legs are stretched out as wide as possible, effectively sending a message to my fellow passengers to bugger off. It's an act that might seem callous in the minds of social butterflies, people who love forming lifelong bonds within the confines of a metal compartment. In reality, I consider those butterflies to be more like vampires, who enjoy sucking the energy out of the droves of introverts around them as a sadistic form of self-pleasure. As a result, I couldn't care less about their misguided thoughts and am better left enjoying my own desolate island of arrogance. While digging deeper into my trance of slumber, I felt the plane preparing for takeoff. Sluggishly it rumbled back and forth until the wheels punched off the floor and into the air. Up we soared as passengers clapped like fools in the aisles next to me. I ignored their hollering and pulled them down my shade as the whites of the clouds blinded my eyes. Suddenly, I became spoiled, ensnared in a world devoid of infuriating stimuli. A mystical land coupled with a serving of solace that was guiding my brain towards the wondrous adventure of sleep and dream. Free at last, or so I thought. While slipping into my bubble of serenity, I felt a heavy tap on my shoulder. My bubble had burst. Not a pleasant feeling. I looked up through my drained eyes and saw a man with a wide, gleaming smirk on his face. "I'm going to take this seat next to you if you don't mind," he blurted, and then plopped down right beside me, not even waiting for a response. In case you were wondering, I did mind. "Wouldn't you rather have a row to yourself? There's so many around on this flight," I replied. This was assuming the man in front of me was a reasonably normal person. That was an incorrect assumption. "Well, what's the fun in that? I would much rather spend the duration of my trip making a new friend. It's a pleasure to meet you." He then stuck his huge, hairy hands square in my face. A scent of garlic and grease pierced my nostrils. "My name is Gregory Enola. Nice to meet you." As this moment arose, I was faced with a choice. Option A, be honest. Tell the stranger I'd rather be by myself, and that I have no interest in sitting with a bumbling, blabbering mouth for the next dozen hours. To the countless individuals choking in a black fog of self-indulgence, this may come across as shy or antisocial. In their minds, they see a man unable to speak to them. A brutal sin. How could anyone resist the urge to converse with a glorious specimen they think themselves to be? I'll tell you how, when they have nothing to offer me. Endless speaking with nothing to say. Sure, I can talk to Jack about sports and Sally about shoes, but what does that give me? I'd rather listen to my own warped thoughts than drown in a sea of apathy. I'm a victim of a generation riddled with a need for gratification. If solitude is my cure, then I'd be a fool to resist it. My other choice was option B, saying yes to the proverbial equivalent of a jackhammer slamming against my skull for half a day. In comparison, option A is by far the most preferable. Unfortunately, I'm still a human despite my glaring robotic tendencies. Like any other human, I'm stitched and sewn into the morally ambiguous marathon of appeasement. For some reason, people have become designed to please others at the detriment of themselves. In that one fateful moment, I was no different. Option B, shine through. I would love to be your new friend, Gregory. My name is Walter. Nice to meet you, I gushed. My innards screamed as I shook his hand, effectively receiving a sweat-riddled lathering. Gregory was built like a gallant superhero 20 years past his prime, burly and brash, enshrined with bile-stained hair, knackered canary teeth, and scar-shredded arms, and a voluminous beard that contained wisps of gray sticking out. He possessed a gauntly hooked nose, one that comically protruded out from his face, a nose better described as a beak due to its impeccably sharp nature, so much so that if a misguided lass was ever compelled to kiss him, she'd likely need a handful of sutures. Gregory's most striking feature, though, was his eyes. They were minuscule and intense, filled with cliched pools of blue that never swayed from your own. He made it a priority to keep persistent eye contact with me, something I did not enjoy. Well, Walt, do you have a last name? I don't mean to pry, I simply find the history and background of last names quite fascinating. I once met a man with a last name that contained over 15 letters. Can you imagine that? It was truly enthralling. It was a Polish name, I think, or was it Swedish? Or maybe it was Mai, I shouted bluntly. Walter Mai. His smile somehow grew even wider. What an interesting name, he gushed. In response, I rolled my eyes and just sat in a daze of stillness, aimlessly staring out a window and praying that our conversation would subside. To be fair, it wasn't by any means a hapless strategy. Often when dealing with motor mouths, all you have to do is stop adding gasoline. Cut them off. Eventually they'll sputter off the road, ending their journey entirely. How about this weather? I hope you don't have any turbulence on the flight, he stated, slashing through the block of silence I hopelessly clung to. In revulsion, I cringed and glanced back up at him. After a few seconds of quelling, I decided to engage. Trust me, Gregory, I've been on hundreds of flights. This drizzle won't make much of a dent. I'm sure we'll be fine, I affirmed. These were the same Mad Libs conversations I've had with my dozens of seatmates. And it's always the same tedious dialogue. Weather, occupation, and hometown. These were the three topics I would discuss until about 5 minutes had passed. After that, I would pretend to yawn and comment on how tired I was. They would often respond with, "Oh, you should get some rest," or I'd have to nudge them in that direction. Not Gregory. You see, right there, the phrase, "we'll be fine," that's always bothered me. Already in shambles from the back and forth, I nodded and looked away, praying he would just shut the fuck up. Who in their right mind would want to be fine? What a ghastly thing to be. With a little hard-nosed work and time, we could be so much more than just fine. Don't you think? He asked. I think you're overthinking it, I whispered. Gregory then bellowed a deep and drawn-out laugh, much to the dismay of a pruned and elderly woman in the aisle next to us, who shot to both of us a sour glare of annoyance. He continued to smile and waved her off. Oh, lady, stop being a hag. Now, Walter, you seem to be a skeptic to my theory. How wonderful! Discourse breeds ingenuity. Please, go on. His voice was objectively loud and theatrical, sounding more like a desperate actor performing a half-assed British accent in a local play than an actual human being. I did my best to stifle my chuckles, but in all honesty, the man's lunacy was oozing from his pores, and I couldn't help but revel in amusement. Well, fine is a very subjective term, no? Maybe people are comfortable being fine. Perhaps being less than fine is depressing, while striving to be more than fine is stressful. I think fine is an acceptable way of being, and best of all, is a very easy thing to be. Before you judge me, understand that in that moment, after that sentence escaped my lips, I could feel the corny flavor still bubbling in my taste buds. Not my proudest quote, but boy, did my audience of one adore it. A fellow philosopher. I knew I would like you. Some say philosophers are just people who ask questions that are impossible to answer, but between you and I don't disagree. That being said, it's simply too much fun, he bellowed, as his legs kicked in excitement. In another attempt to thwart my verbal strangler, I cracked a forced smile and diverted my eyes back to the window, filling my sight with growingly onyx clouds bursting from the scenes with stripes of ash. A harrowing image, and yet every time his sentence was met with a period, I'd sink my face into it, constructing a happy place from the barrels of a nightmare. Never a wise choice. Would you say you are simply fine, Walter? Is that why you rushed to defend it? Thus began our therapy session. Sure, why not? I answered. Gregory scoffed. I would have to disagree with you on that front. Amused, I looked up at him and pressed further. A bit presumptuous on your part, don't you think? I'm perfectly content believing I'm normal. Average, if you will. In fear of tarnishing any strands of trust I could form with you, it's important to understand that what I said to him was a completely bombastic lie. An answer to act as a escape rope to pull me from the shadowed cave of a unilateral conversation. I'd rather have 80 pounds of pop rocks guzzling in my eardrums than listen to another man's hysterics. As if he could even conceptualize what normal was. Being ordinary, in my eyes, is the worst thing anyone could be. A boring shade of gray that bleeds into the background, a color that won't offend or stick out amongst a multifarious of ill-fated crayons. One that will never be plucked or utilized to build the next great masterpiece. In summary, I'd rather be called a cunt than be called average. That's a messed up way of thinking, but it's the only way I have. My desperate attempt to thwart the bearded man's blathering of bullshit was done so in vain, as both of Gregory's bushy eyebrows raised in the air. Well, there it is, the smoking gun. You are a liar. Annoyed and embarrassed the man's words affected me, I shifted in my chair to give Gregory my full, undivided attention. A bit harsh. What makes you say that? I asked. A fair question that was answered with a meaty finger that wagged in my face as Gregory's cheeky smile continued to radiate. His body language was akin to that of an aged, grease-slicked mob boss, doing his best to show off his Italian heritage, which is fine except for the fact that Gregory's bloodstream seemed to lack even an ounce of marinara sauce. In truth, he was likely from a different planet. Everyone thinks they are special, Walter, whether they announce it to the world or not. It is a basic necessity for the human brain to function. Ideations, beliefs, and motivations are all thought of as original and self-interested in the mind of those who are special. We are all in the leading role of our own personal movie, and the hero at the end of the day always wins. Of course, I am no different. I tend to think of myself as a very intelligent and spiritual man, one whose life has taken a myriad of left and right turns, but in the end is on a direct path towards my destiny. It's quite simply part of my makeup. Good for you, I guess. Well, if you're in the leading role, that probably makes me an extra, correct? Sounds about right, I exclaimed. In response, Gregory beamed and waved his hands in a frenzy. There you go again, proving me right. Let me make something clear, Walter. I have learned this after 50 years of walking this beautiful earth. It is the man who does not think he is special, who is most special of all. A great man once told me that, and I'm certain it's true. Trite fortune cookie drivel that confirmed the lunacy of the legend that was Gregory Enola. It was rare a seatmate ever intrigued me, and this man was no different. That being said, part of me enjoyed conversing with a walking, talking cartoon character for a few minutes. People like Gregory rarely exist, and while that's usually for good reason, it's refreshing to see another human being who slipped through conformity's cracks. So, Mr. Special, what compels a guy like you to travel to Tokyo? Business or pleasure? Or dare I say both, he continued. I couldn't help but scoff. Trust me, buddy, traveling to an air-polluted rat maze brings me no pleasure. I've got to make a sales pitch to one of my company's clients regarding a new product we're about to introduce, I commented. His reaction to the sentence was odd. His earnest gaze faded into a clenched glare that grew tight as his eyes squinted into oblivion. Gregory then, and I promise this is not a joke, sneezed square into my face. A blistering blow so loud that it woke up not only everyone on the flight, but also the people sleeping thousands of feet below us. Chattering then echoed throughout the plane while a baby's wail could be heard smattering in the front. Like any normal person would do, Gregory then wiped my face clean with his bare hand while I sat in a frozen block of confusion. Mucus dripping down my chin as he plucked a handkerchief from his overcoat and slurped the goo off with one fell swoop. He then chuckled to himself, then wiped his nose. My apologies. Sometimes I feel like I'm allergic to these planes, Walt. Something about them, I just don't know. Perhaps the free peanuts. Regardless, please continue, he exclaimed. Well, okay. I'm going to be presenting on... My sentence was interrupted as he leaned forward, stretching his neck until his forehead was mere inches from mine. I winced backward as he had already conditioned me to fear another shot from his crooked bazooka. "Aren't you going to say bless you?" he quipped. "Wasn't planning on it," I murmured while stroking rogue fluid off my cheeks. "Like I was saying, I'm giving a presentation on a new feline medication that helps relieve them of moodiness. The first antidepressant designed for pets. It's going to sell like hotcakes," I affirmed. His mouth dropped agape. "How fascinating! I never knew cats suffered from depression," said Gregory. "They do the same crap every day on a cyclical, continuous loop and despise their supposed owners who control everything they do. How can they not be depressed?" I joked. My words flung over Gregory's voluminous head as he pondered a thought. "Oh, forgive me for prying here, Walter, but you don't seem like the salesman type. I usually can't stand those blowhards, endlessly chattering through their porcelain teeth, dancing around agendas while they try to sap every cent they can from you. It's almost impossible for me to invest myself into them knowing they're about as authentic as a politician's lips. You must despise your profession, no doubt in my mind." All I could do in a situation like that was offer a shrug. It's not like I intended to slave away at some entry-level snob job my entire life. I remember studying zoology at a school and thinking I'd be the next Charles Darwin, cut from some magnanimous cloth designed to shatter the world with a stroke of a pen, I admitted. Gregory was smiling from ear to ear that his hypothesis was correct, rewarding himself while he smacked his knees in delight. "Then become the next Darwin. Your stunted self-perception is nothing more than a barrier to what you want. Remove the barrier and start sending a ladder whose rungs lead to something worth climbing to. Pick a better path," he avowed. It was comical how simple his words seemed, and yet how silly his provocations were. Depriving oneself of a formed self-perception is something not even the enlightened prophets of Buddha could achieve. One falls on a path like mine when reality bites you in the face. I wasn't smart enough to be a zoologist, and I wasn't dumb enough to shovel elephant shit my entire life, and so I found a happy medium, I commented, annoyed that a sentence like that even needed to be said. Gregory's face shook in disappointment. "Now, tell me, Walt, for you and the countless others who succumbed to reality and felt into that medium, how does one cope, self-handicapping and dropping down the rabbit hole of failure?" He was doing his best to rip something out of me. A clever man seeks self-disclosure to earn another man's trust. Gregory wasn't getting that from me. If he was, I'd answer with the truth. My entire life plan had been put in place, set in stone, concrete with blazing, vibrant signs pointing me into the wasteland of ordinary, well below what I'm capable of, and there's not a thing I can do to change it. It doesn't take Freud to figure out how could that make a person feel. Instead, I took the route deprived of sappy, sullen discourse, also known as the better route. "Can't we talk about something different?" I pleaded, knowing resistance of a topic would only pull him closer to it. Instead, he obliged, as if he knew I wouldn't play his game any further. "Fine. Walt, let me help you out then. You're about to make a big sales pitch to some mysterious magic pill. Let's practice then. Make sure you're ready. Do me a favor. Imagine I'm your prospective client," he bellowed, fixing himself upright and straight as he looked down at me regally and proud. "So, Mr. Mai, you've traveled a long way to meet me. Let's save you any more time than you've already wasted and get to business. You have something to sell, and I'm looking for something to buy. So, go ahead. Make this easy for me. Sell me on it. How does something like your magic pill work?" he asked, waiting with bated breath for my response. "It doesn't," I laughed. His face dropped in disappointment. "Like any good old-fashioned American medicine, it's complete and utter bullshit. A glorified sugar pill ready to inflict a negligible dose of placebo effect onto every whacked-out cat lady that walks the aisles of Walmart. It's brilliant. Everyone's left happy. The owners think that they're doing their pet a favor, and it'll put a fat stack of cash into my company's wallet." "And the cats?" asked Gregory with sheepish eyes. "Who gives a shit? It's a cat," I answered. He sat deflated into his seat like a child who was just told Santa doesn't exist. A sliver of guilt churned in my stomach as he shook his head in disappointment. Enticed by the prospect of shifting topics, I did my duty and asked him the question a civilized human being is supposed to ask. "So, what brings you to the fine land of Tokyo?" Like a light being flicked on, droves of electricity funneled through his face as he beamed at me. Pleasure, he avowed. Ah, and what does pleasure entail for a crazy gal like you? I asked. Oh, how I wish I could reveal all my delicious details of my adventure, but it's a secret. Not even I know the itinerary. No day set in stone, and I can't wait to see what lies in store, he stated. His eyes were glowing bulbous as he shivered in jubilance. Ah, so it's a mystery, huh? Sounds awful, I exclaimed. No, not in the slightest. Twists and turns are bountiful where I'm going. If I knew beforehand where those turns would take me, then and only then would it become an awful endeavor. And you know what they say? A schedule is nothing more than an anchor to opportunity, he gruffed. My attempts to harness a smile crumbled as I laughed in the man's face. People actually say that? I asked. He shrugged. No, but they should, he answered, affirming my suspicions that he was a man just brimming with nonsensical gibberish. What else did we discuss on the flight? Well, I'll do you a favor and save you some time. Nothing of substance. We delved into his work as a biology professor, his hometown in Denver, politics, meaning of life, basic stuff. Well, one of us did. The other nodded and mumbled yes or of course every once in a while until the marathon of a conversation subsided, a conclusion that required 4 hours to accomplish, wasting the benefits of my sleeping pills. At one point, I believe he was even crying. In all honesty, I don't remember that much. I wasn't really paying attention. One thing that seared into my brain, however, was Gregory's major character flaw. It's a little game I like to play with myself in which I quickly summarize people and put them into small, simple, categorized boxes. After a second of deliberation, it was clear Greg fell into the egregiously lacking self-awareness box. Don't get me wrong, at first he seemed like a charismatic, genuine guy, and there are some far worse boxes to be sorted into. That being said, a lacking self-awareness is an awful thing to have. Up there with cancer and being a Browns fan. Well, not that bad, but you get the point. Eventually, he let me close my eyes after I agreed to strap my seatbelt tight in case of emergency. Do me a favor, though. Please don't think I weakly gave in to his demands. He initially wanted me to spend the remaining duration of the flight wrapped in bubble wrap, essentially demanding that I sit next to the pilot in the cockpit while also holding his hands in case the flight took a turn for the worse. Gregory even warned me that he read the weather reports and I just don't trust them. They said minor drizzle, but I smell the air and see the skies. There is a storm coming, and by the grace of God, we are going to prepare for it. It was a harebrained claim, and one I didn't even consider. After plunging some additional pills down my throat, I quickly seeped into my nestle of sleep and comfort, and transported into my world of dream. Ambien has a knack for making my universe a tad more magical. This time my world was in the midst of a river. I was left floating in serenity, safely nuzzled atop a bed of crystal-clear perfection. The sky was a magnificent shade of blue, as the sun glistened from above. Sea foam scented the air, while birds fluttered overhead, chirping sweet sounds of symphony. A calm oasis that launched me into pure nirvana. Much better than sitting on a stiff coach flight chair, watching crap B-movies and eating plastic dinners for a century. I was away from the horrors of reality, and now finally alone, finally at peace. That is, until I was awoken by a sudden flare of light to the right of me. Then came the searing boom as the wing was struck by a powerful blow. Lightning just hit my plane. I was collapsing downward. I was going to die.